Sauron in Numenor. Sauron was known by many names in many different places, whether serving Aule as Mairon, the Maia, living deceptively amongst the elves as Annatar, Lord of Gifts, or terrorizing Middle-earth as the Second Dark Lord. He wrought destruction and misery wherever he traversed. But today, we will look at Sauron's influence in Numenor and its eventual downfall in the Second Age. How did he get there, and what part did he play? It is in Part 4 of the Silmarillion, titled the Akallabeth, or the Downfallen, that the events determining Numenor's fate are detailed. After the War of Wrath that ended the First Age, Sauron, whose master Morgoth had been defeated, sought the pardon of the Valar for his transgressions, but upon Eonwe's request that he return to Valinor to face their judgment, he fled into the east. After a time of remaining concealed, he believed the Valar had begun to neglect Middle-earth once again. He then waged war around the elves and men, both outright and covertly, for another several hundred years. This period of time included the forging of the Rings of Power by the Gwaith y Myrdain, a brotherhood of Noldorin smiths, as well as Sauron's creation of Barad-dûr and the One Ring, Second Age, 1600. He would eventually destroy Eregion, torturing and killing Celebrimbor. Lindon was left vulnerable to attack, but with Númenorian support for Gil-galad, the Dark Lord is defeated and driven back to Mordor with a decimated army. Thus, Sauron's hatred for Numenor is sparked. He would seek the destruction of their people and the island itself, should it become a possibility. After his retreat, he begins to bring about designs for domination of a much less forceful nature. He deals out the magic rings to dwarves and men, forsaking the elves as they had proven difficult to control. 3 of the men were Númenorian lords, who, along with the 6 others to receive them, fade into ringwraiths in the 1200s of the Second Age. The dwarves, however, proved too resistant to the influence of the rings. Meanwhile, in Numenor, people begin to forsake their gifts of long and healthy lives, as well as their friendship with the Eldar. They resent the ban from the Valar, forbidding them from traveling so far west as to lose sight of their own island. They wonder what more they could have sacrificed in the wars against Morgoth, who it was that originally convinced them to see their gift as a doom. Many desired the immortality of the elves and the Valar. What began as a hidden grudge grew into sentiments shared and accepted amongst many of the Númenorians, thus dividing the nation into the king's men and the faithful. The faithful were those who remained loyal to the elves and Valar, while the king's men, the larger faction, sought ever more power. The nation would indeed grow in wealth and might, but its spirit becomes tarnished and the quality of life diminished. The Númenorians would return to Middle-earth in Second Age 3262, upon hearing Sauron's claims to the title of King of Men and Lord of the World. A proud and insulted fleet of the king, Ar-Pharazôn, made its way to the shores and began the march towards Mordor. Sauron's enemies fled from the great might of Numenor, and he realizes he would have no chance of victory in open battle, but his might extends beyond that of military prowess. And so he hearkens to the summons, requested so that he may swear his fealty. Sauron does so, but is wise with his remarks to the king. Ar-Pharazôn, unconvinced of his humility, brings him back to Numenor as a prisoner, just as Sauron secretly hopes. Through his unrivaled cunning and flattery, he is promoted from prisoner to chief advisor within a few years on the island. He taught them things that had yet to be revealed to them, and earned the title of Zigur, or the Wizard, and the favor of the king's men. But Amandil, a sea captain and trusted official of Ar-Pharazôn, is one of the few to remain untrustworthy. He and his son, Elendil, and his sons Isildur and Anarion remain part of the faithful, but their faction grows thin and they become labeled as rebels. They too were of the line of Elros, the first king of Numenor, but they were not of the ruling house and had less influence than the king's men. Sauron focuses his efforts on undermining the authority of the Valar, and the One, especially Eru Ilúvatar. He claims Eru is a phantom, and a tool of the Valar to keep men oppressed and fearful, a justification for their enslavement. It is only Melkor, he pleads, who can truly set them free and give them the strength to endure. Eventually, open worship of Melkor begins, and men are forbidden to ascend the hallowed Meneltarma, the Pillar of Heaven in Quenya, a sacred mountain in the center of Numenor. He dismisses Amandil, whom he hates most. Amandil, along with his heirs and some of the faithful, then travel to Romenna on the eastern shore, which would become a haven for the remaining elf friends. Sauron urges the king to cut down Nimloth, the white tree of Armenelos, gifted to them by the elves of Tol Eressëa, seeing it as a symbol of loyalty to the Valar. But Ar-Pharazôn would not do so yet, as he believed its fate to be intertwined with that of his house, a prophecy of his father-in-law, Tar-Palantir. Hearing of this intention, Amandil's grandson, Isildur, embarks on a mission to rescue a fruit from the great ancestor of Telperion. Hiding his identity, Isildur secretly acquires the fruit, but is mortally wounded in the effort. He would only wake again at the first budding of leaves on the young sapling, which was planted and blessed by Amandil. The rescue, however, would spark the final decision to cut Nimloth down, and in its place was built a massive temple topped with a silver dome. Here, Sauron establishes the worship of Melkor, becoming high priest of a cult-like following. This temple of Melkor would host an altar of fire, with smoke ever rising from the top of the dome. The first fire is fueled by the lumber of Nimloth, creating a fog of treachery that would engulf the island for 7 days. Thereafter, the temple is used for human sacrifice to Melkor, that he should spare them of their fate. Many of the victims are those of the faithful, or those who are falsely accused of such allegiance, or other crimes against the crown. As despotism grows, so does the wickedness of Numenor. Death comes sooner and more often. Murder runs rampant as men become violent and mistrustful, and the peaceful slumber in which Númenóreans used to depart the world is now degenerating into states of sickness and madness. Ar-Pharazôn grows into the mightiest tyrant since Melkor's time in Arda, but it is Sauron who pulls the strings. The king's fleet would no longer arrive on the shores of Middle-earth as friends, but as conquerors. As Ar-Pharazôn ages, he is ever more vulnerable to Sauron's urging of attack on the Undying Lands. The military might of Númenor has grown considerably during Sauron's time there, and with the king's mortality staring him in the face, he begins designs for a major attack. Amandil, upon hearing of these plans, decides to repeat the deed of his forefather, Eärendil, who had sailed west to Valinor in the First Age, seeking help against Morgoth's destruction. Elendil is told to depart with his sons and the rest of the faithful to avoid the war. He would listen and gather important items and records of lore to keep safe in their ships off the coast, including the tree from the fruit of Nimloth. Sadly, Amandil and his 3 servants disappear from all tale and memory after their departure. The wrath of the Valar could still be felt in Númenor. Having previously enjoyed perfect weather with sweet scents in the air, they were now frequented by darkened skies and violent storms. Ships would wreck at sea, as had never happened before to their people. Some Númenóreans grew fearful, but most grew in their hatred of the Valar. The earth quaked, and Meneltarma spewed smoke from its top. Great clouds in the shape of eagles blacked out the sun, and sent lightning strikes upon them, killing several people. The temple of Melkor was lit aflame by one such strike, but Sauron defied the lightning, standing unharmed at the top of the dome, and thus was seen as a god. In Second Age 3319, Ar-Pharazôn completes his armada, called the Great Armament. He boards his ship, Alcarondas, the Castle of the Sea, and leads the Númenóreans west to Aman, breaking the ban of the Valar, as the island disappeared in the distance. The trumpets of their fleet drown out the thunder that befell their home, yet they arrive at their destination to silence. There are no elves or Valar in sight, but there stood the awesome white mountain of Taniquetil, the tallest peak in all of Arda. The vision of astonishment almost deters Ar-Pharazôn from following through with the attack, but his pride overpowers his humility, and he steps onto the shores of the Undying Lands. He would surely claim it if no one would do battle for it, but Manwë, knowing the Valar are forbidden to wage war on men, had abandoned his post to seek the counsel of Eru. Eru's judgment would change the world forever. A vast chasm was opened in the middle of the sea between Numenor and Aman, swallowing the great armament. Ar-Pharazôn and his drowned army would remain there, in the Caves of the Forgotten, until the last battle at the end of the world. Great waves from the rift are cast upon the Isle of Numenor, dragging it and all who remain there into the sea. This includes Tar Miriel, the queen who ascended to the top of Meneltarma in hopes of salvation. Sauron had been sitting in the temple of Melkor, laughing at the trumpets of Numenor and the thunder, and most importantly, the thought of no longer having to quarrel with the Edain. But he was not spared from the destruction, being torn asunder by the waves. Being not a physical being, he would survive the event, but lose his ability to take on a fair and charming form. He would pass as a black shadow across the sea, back to the lands of Mordor, taking up his ring and a physical form of utter malice. The continent of Aman was thereafter removed from the reach of mortals, and the world was no longer flat, but spherical. Only the elves were permitted to find the straight way to the Blessed Realm. Elendil and his company were spared the horrors, having forsaken the war against the Valar. The winds cast them upon the shores of Middle-earth, where they would establish realms in exile, the kingdoms of Arnor in the north and Gondor in the south. The surviving folk of Elros, the Dunedain, would continue to fight against Sauron in Middle-earth for many years to come.